In this video, I will show how to make a copy of the Instagram sign-in page with HTML and CSS. This is a good beginner project as there isn't a huge amount going on, but you have to think about the layout and how to get all of your elements lined up correctly. There is also some responsiveness, so when I make this page smaller, you'll notice that the phones disappear and you're left with just the sign-in form itself. So I will add that in with some media queries. So let's just jump straight in. I've got my index.html and style.css files set up here. They're both blank at the moment. And I've got this images subfolder that's got all of my assets that I plan to use for this project. Now you can use whichever editor you're most comfortable with. I'm using Sublime Text, and I've also got the browser sync package installed. So that means that when I save my file, it's automatically going to refresh my page, and it just saves me having to go back and forth and refresh it every time myself. Now the first thing to do is set up my HTML document, and within Sublime I can just type HTML and hit tab, and it's going to pre-populate this skeleton structure for it. So in the title I will put Instagram, and then I'm going to start set up my actual structure for the page. Now the way I'm going to set this up is to copy the original layout. I'll have this section in the middle and then a footer underneath. And then this middle section is also going to be divided further into a left-hand side with the phones and then a right-hand side with the actual forms. So let's do that just now. I'll create a section and I will give it a class which is going to be wrapper. And within that, I will have two divs. So I'm going to have a div with a class of left. So this is going to be the left-hand side with the phones. And I'll come back to that one in a second. So I'll close that tag, and then I'll have another one with a class of right. So that's going to allow me to style them separately. So let's close those tags and close the section tag. So if I save this and refresh my page, I'm not going to have anything on there just yet, but I do have the structure coming in the way I've laid it out. So the first thing I want to do before I start styling anything is just to load these two phone images. So the phone image and then the screen that's going to be inside it. I'll load both of those in just now. And we'll just load that in with the tag img. The source is, for the first one, is going to be images, which is this folder I've got here. And then within it, the image that I want is phones.png. So I'll say images /phones.png. Now, if you've got them named in any other way, if you've got the folders arranged differently, you need to make sure that you put in the correct address here for the file name so that the website can find it. So now I'm actually going to hide that tab on the left, just so I've got a little bit more room to work with. So I've got that, and I need to give it an alternative if the image can't be found. So the alternative here is just phone, close that tag, save, and now you can see it's come up on the right hand side there. I've got my phone image, and it's just got a blank screen. So let's load in the image that goes inside there. Before I give it a source, actually, I will give it a class because I will need to style this one. So I will give it a class of screen, and then I will load the image location. So it's the same folder, images /screen.jpg. And then let's give that an alt of phone screen. Okay, save that, and now the images are coming up side by side. So now I can start doing a little bit of styling and actually bring them up on top of each other. So first of all, let's link this style sheet into my HTML document, and that's done within this header section here, or the head, sorry, of the document. I'll type link, and if I just hit tab, it's going to pre-populate most of the information that I need. So it's the style sheet, and I just need to give it the location. Well, it's in the same folder as my index file, so I don't need to give it any additional folders. I just need to give it the name, which is style.css. So now anything that I do within here is going to be pulled through and styled on my main document. Now, there's a few things that I want to apply just to the overall document before I start even working with these images here. And that is, I want to get rid of the margin. So I'll set an overall margin of 0 for all elements. And you'll notice that when I save this, these are going to move over to the left and the top a little bit because there's a margin here by default, and that's going to disappear. So I save and everything moves up a little bit. I'll get rid of padding, and then I will also set my box sizing, oops, not box shadow, box sizing to border box. Next thing I want to do is start styling the body tag. So I open up the body tag and I'll set a background color to it to begin with. I'll say the background color is FA. And when I save, you notice it goes slightly grayer than what I had there before. Then let's set a font here. So the font family is Helvetica Sans Serif. And then I will set a height, or rather a min height for this page. So I will just set it to the entirety of the viewport, which is going to be 100 VH. And this just means that the content of my page is going to take up the entirety of the entire height of it. Now what I want to start doing is positioning these things. So for a lot of the positioning, I'm going to be using Flexbox here. And to use Flexbox, I need a flex container and a flex item. So my body in this case is going to be the flex container. So I can do that by saying display flex. So everything that is now within the body is going to become a flex item, and by default is going to be displayed in a row side by side. Now I don't have anything else within the body except for this section tag here. All this other stuff that's within the section tag, so that isn't covered by it. So at the moment the body is my flex container, and then the section tag is my flex item. So remember, I did say that the other component here is going to be my footer, so I can add that in just temporarily. It's not going to have anything in it, and that's going to become my other flex item. So let's just say footer content and close that one out. So when I save that now, you see it's appeared on the right hand side here, and that's simply because I have set this to display flex. So by default it's taking my section here and it's taking the footer and it's just put them side by side. What I actually want is a vertical alignment rather than horizontal, or vertical layout rather than horizontal. And to do that, I just need to change the flex direction. So rather than the default display of rows, I can set flex direction to column. And now when I save, you'll notice that the footer goes to the bottom. So now I've got this display set as flex with all of my objects on top of each other. The next thing I want to do is put this screen image into the actual phones. But before I do that, I want to be able to see an outline of all of these elements here on the screen. Now I could go into inspect and look at each one of them to see where they start and finish. But what I like to do instead is just add a border to everything. So I'll add a border, which is 1 pixels, solid and red. And when I save that, you'll notice that all of my elements, divs and sections and these images, for example, all of them now have a border. So I can kind of see the outline of all of these things on the screen just at a quick glance. So now let's start styling this section here. Now remember, I split this up into a left and a right. So at the moment, because there is no right, there is no content within the right hand side div, the left hand side div is taking up all of the space. So it's kind of stretching across it, which is fine for now. So what I will do to move this image into this section here is I will just play around with positioning. So first of all, I will need to go into my left class and I will need to give it a position of relative. So when I save, nothing actually changes, but now that means that I can move around the elements that are within that class. So the element that I want to move is this screen image here, which has the class of screen. So if I now give this a position of absolute, it will automatically snap to the top. So now it's possible to just move this around by whichever pixel value I like. So if I just set this to, say, left 0 and top 0, it goes into the top left corner. So it's essentially saying that there is no offset from the left hand side and there's no offset from the top. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, but if I say left 10 pixels, it doesn't move to the left, it actually moves to the right. What this is meaning is this is how much I want to offset by from the left hand side. So I'm offsetting from the left by 10 pixels, which essentially means I'm moving to the right hand direction. Well, I can see that I need to move it quite a bit more. So let's move it 150 pixels from the left, which means to the right, and now you can see it's sitting pretty much in the middle of the phone. It just needs to move down a little bit, so that means I need to offset from the top. I'll go with 100 pixels here, and there you go, sitting perfectly in the middle of that phone screen. And that is actually all I need to do for the left hand side. Now of course I still need to position it properly, so it's sitting kind of in the middle of the page, but for now that's everything that I need to do in terms of positioning things inside it relative to each other. That means that I can start on this right hand side instead. Now the right hand side itself is split into individual sections. There's this login panel, the sign up panel, and then the apps. So I'm going to have to use divs to set it up in the same way. I'll go back into my index file, and this div class right is this section that I'm going to be working with. So first of all, I need to load in my image, which is that logo. So that sits up on top here. Now that's going to be sitting inside this panel up here. So I'm going to divide it into individual classes. So this is going to be a login panel, a sign up panel, and then the apps. So let's say here div class, and I will give it 2 classes. So the first one is going to be panel, because that's going to be common across my login and sign up panels. But then I will add another class, which is going to make it specific to just that login panel and so on. And I'll explain all these when I'm actually going through the CSS for them, and you'll be able to see how they change. So let's load in the image first of all. Image, we'll give it an ID of logo. It's only going to apply to this logo, so I'm not going to bother with a class. I'll just go straight to an ID. Then the image location. It's within the images folder, and it's called Instagram logo.png. And then an alt is going to be logo. I believe this picture is quite big, so when I save this, yeah, it takes up quite a lot of room. I'll have to style it to make it smaller and to fit the container that it's going to go into. The next thing is to add in all of these forms here, all these inputs. Now all of that is going to be contained within a form element. So within this div, I'll create a form. And now within that form, I can start adding in those inputs. So the first input was for username. I'm actually going to break these out over a few lines just so it's a little bit easier to structure. I'm going to give it a class. First of all, a class is an input box, so that I'll be able to style all of these input boxes in the same way. Type, well, for this one, the type is just text. Then the name is going to be username, because that's what it's asking for within that section. I'm going to add the required flag. So that essentially means that if you type information, or you don't type anything in and you click the login button, it will flag up to say you've left that empty. It's a required field. And then lastly, you notice that on the actual Instagram page, there's a little placeholder inside it that says phone number, username, or email. So I can add that placeholder in as well. So placeholder equals phone number, username, or email. Let's just add the ending tag at the end here. Okay, so save that one. There you go. It's kind of appeared down here. This layout is still a little bit messed up. I need to structure them properly, but for now you can see that there's an input box here. Now I can add the next one. So I will just copy that down. The next one is for the password. So most of this stays the same. It's still an input box class, but now the type is going to be password. So the difference here, if I save this, you can see this appears here. As I type into it, the characters are hidden, and that's automatically done because I have added this password tag. The name of this one is also going to change to password. It's still a required field, but now the placeholder changes. So the placeholder here is just password, and that's what we're going to go with. So we'll put password in here. And then the final input is this button here. So you could do it as a button, but I'm going to do it as an input here. So we'll put that in. The class is now going to be different. So the class is a button. So you can see it's still added in as an input, but I'm going to start messing around with the CSS and style it properly. So the type is submit, and there you go. Straight away it's flicked over to a button. Name is going to be login. And we'll give it a value of login. So at the moment it just says submit, but if I change this to login, it changes what's on the text. And I don't need to get this, so it doesn't have the required tag because it's just a button, and it doesn't have a placeholder either. So I can get rid of these two. Okay, there we go. Now underneath all of this stuff, so I know right now it's kind of laid out just in order, so it's not really following the same structure as I need. But underneath, you notice that there's this little divider here. So I've got this or with a horizontal line on either side. I'm going to be doing that with pretty much just CSS, but I'll need to add them in as little classes to begin with. So underneath all of my inputs, which are finished for this panel, I will add another div with the class of divider. And within that div, I will have further divs. This is going to be div class of line. So that's going to be the horizontal line that you saw there. It doesn't have any content, so I can just close that tag out. Oops. And I can copy that down because I have two dividers. So I've got I've got two lines within the divider, one on the left and one on the right. And what is between them is or. So we close that out and then just close out that div as well. So save that, and at the moment there's nothing there. You can't see any lines. You can see the red is very thick around it, so that's just because there's all these divs going on. They don't really have any content or width or height, so they're just adding extra lines. And the final two things within this login panel are this login with Facebook and forgot password. Now these are both links, so I can set them up in the same way as links. Underneath this div, I'll say I'll give them a class first of all. So the first one is login with Facebook. So I'll give it a class of FB. It doesn't go anywhere well, in my case anyway, it's just going to be a dummy link, so I don't need to put an address in there. And we'll say it's login with Facebook. Close that tag and then set up another one underneath, which is going to have the class of forgot. This is the forgot password link. Again, it's not going to go anywhere, just a dummy link. And this just says forgot password. And then we close out that A tag. Okay, and that's it. So that's the form. It's quite a lot of typing actually, but that's the form set up for the login section. So if we save this again, you can see now all of it is there. It's just not styled in any proper way. It's not laid out correctly at all just yet. Now this is not looking very pleasing to the eye just yet. So I do want to start styling it, but if you notice, there's only a couple of little things to add on this right-hand side section. So I may as well just quickly add those in the HTML, just get that finished off, and then I can really get into the CSS part of it. So underneath this form, if I just check my indentation, I've got my div class for right, and then I had my div class for panel login. So I should have closed that from the beginning actually. I missed that tag there. I need to make sure that that tag is closed. So that is my login panel done. Now I can do another div, which is going to, again, it's a panel, so I'll give it a panel class, but this one is sign up rather than login. I'm just going to remember to close that tag straight away. And within this, I actually don't have that much. So all we've got is just some text. Say don't have an account, sign up. So to do that, let's just add a P here. Don't have an account. And underneath, I'll have a link, which is not going to go anywhere. So it's a dummy link. And it says sign up. And we close that one. And that's it. So that's that div done. So don't have an account, sign up. And the last div that's underneath this is for those apps. So we'll say div class is equal to apps. And within this one, again, not a whole lot. It just says get the app, and then there's a couple of images that are links. So they're going to link into that app store. So we'll add a paragraph here to say get the app, close that tag, and then I'll add another div because I want those two images to be inside their own little container. Say div class is equal to app stores, and just put a couple of images in here. So the source is image source images / app store.svg. I give it an alt of app store, and then the other one is image source images / play store.svg and an alt of Play Store. Just remember to close out that div there, and then finally this div here. So that's it. I've now got everything set up. The images are all different sizes. This one's probably about right. This one's absolutely massive. So it looks terrible, but that is all of the content for the initial middle section anyway. I've still to do the footer, but that is all the content for the main container, the wrapper for the left and right hand sides. Okay, so now for the actual styling. First of all, how do I get all of this stuff to come up side by side in my left and right? Why is it all coming up underneath? Well, I don't have any positioning or anything else declared on this. So essentially all it's doing is fitting in as much as it can. A lot of these are block elements. Some of the inline elements are going side by side, but everything else is just going all on top of each other. So it's just stacking all of my divs. What I actually want to do is take that wrapper that I tried to put all of this inside of. So remember, I've got this section class of wrapper, which then splits into left and right. Well, it's not actually displaying it in that order. And to do that, I need to take out the wrapper. So we'll go, it's just underneath the body. So I'll access the wrapper class. And again, I'm going to use Flexbox for this. So if I just set my display to flex, you notice straight away, everything is jumped up here. So that is, well, the main reason why I really like using Flexbox is it's quite a lot easier to play around with the alignment of things and the structure of things once you understand how the flex items and containers work. So essentially what's happened here is that I've set this wrapper as a flex container. So it says, okay, well, everything that's within it becomes a flex item. At the moment, I know I've got all of this stuff, but those aren't considered the flex items. The flex items are the things that are just directly within this section class of wrapper, which are just this div class of left and this div class of right. all the other stuff is contained within them, so that doesn't transfer through. So it's essentially just taking my left and my right divs and it's stacked them side by side. The default is to stack them or to align them in a row. So what I could say here is flex direction column, just like I did above for the body, and now it's just gone back to how it was before. It's stacked them on top of each other. If I set this back to row, it's going to put them side by side. So that's the default value. I can get rid of it. I don't need to specify that. It's automatically going to set them up like this, side by side. So now I can start working on this side here. First of all, I'm going to make that logo just temporarily reduced in size because it's kind of massive. So let's say width of 150 pixels. I'm going to have it a little bit more dynamic later so it fills into the container, but just for now, so it's not so ridiculously oversized, let's go with that, and it does look a little bit better. Okay, so now I want to be able to start styling these things. If I get rid of my border just for now, you can see that there's nothing here. So there should be a big rectangular white panel around these sections, but I haven't got any of that just yet, and the layout's kind of all over the place. So let's start adding in these panels. Now remember, if I go back into my divs, I've got two classes attached to these. So the first one is panel, and then I become a bit more specific to either login or further down here, which I've lost, is sign up. But both of them have the panel class. So I can style that one first of all. I'll keep it above logo because I'm going to come back to this. I want to remember that it's just a temporary one. We'll say panel. And just start off with some sizes for it. Let's give it a size, a width of 350 pixels. So that kind of constrains it a little bit. And a background color. And this is going to be white, so FFF. Actually, you can't really see what's going on with this in place, so let's get rid of that. So now you can kind of make out there is this white background to them. So there is a little panel set up already. Okay, the next thing is to add a border. There was kind of like a grayish border around these. 1 pixel solid, and let's go with that gray color. Okay, so now you can see them outlined a little bit better. Add a border radius just to smooth it out a little of 2 pixels. And I don't want this, at the moment you can see everything is pushed up against the edges. So I want to bump everything in within this container or within the panel, and you do this by adding padding. So we'll say padding of 20 pixels top and bottom and 40 pixels left and right. So now you can see there's this space that's being created within each of the panels. So it kind of pads out the inside of it and pushes the content a little bit further into the center. I also want to space them out apart from each other. So I'll add a margin of 5 pixels top and bottom and then 0 left and right. So margin is what goes on the outside. So this actually is a good example of it because I've got this border here. You can kind of see what happened. The padding is on the inside of the border and the margin is on the outside of the border. So when I set this margin of 5 pixels top and bottom, it created a gap between my two elements. So if I get rid of this again, you can see they get bumped up against each other. If I put it back in, then there's this 5 pixels top and bottom. So it's actually 10 pixels between them because this one has 5 pixels on the top and that one has 5 pixels on the bottom. The problem here still is that they're not actually centered. So all this stuff is still aligned to the left-hand side. It's just because I've got this padding, it's kind of looking like it's a little bit in towards the middle, but really it's still as far left as it can go in both instances. So I'm going to use Flexbox again to centralize all this kind of stuff. And to do that, I'll first of all need to set the display to flex on my panel. I'll say display is flex, and remember by default, flex is in the row direction, so it puts everything side by side. So I've kind of ended up with my panel being my flex container, and within the panel I had all of these different items. So I have, for example, my logo image and then my form. So that's the two things that are within the login panel. So of course they've been displayed side by side. Now all the information within the form is still vertical, it's still in the column because that isn't affected by this display flex that I've set. That's nested further in. So what I need to do here is set my display or my flex direction to column, but that's not going to work exactly as I actually intended to. So if I put this to column just now and save that, well, that has fixed what's going on here to an extent. That's stacked on top of each other, but then this panel here is now messed up. So I want this one to be displayed as a column, but this needs to be displayed as a row because the sign up button is to the right hand side. So I'm not going to be able to apply the exact same flex direction to both of them. And that's where the difference between the login and the sign up classes comes in. Remember, I set a panel class as a common class to both of them, but then I gave them a little bit of uniqueness with this one being a login and this one being a sign up. So that means I can style them a little bit differently. Rather than putting this flex direction in here, I can add in extra classes for them. So let's get rid of that just now. And the first class was for the login panel. So I'll just say my flex direction is column. And now this one is displayed the way I want it, in column, and this one is displayed as a row because that is the default. So both of them are now working out the way I want them to be. However, it's still not centralized within the panel. So to do that, we can say align items center. And when I save that, you notice that the Instagram logo has moved to the middle, but the rest of the stuff doesn't seem to have moved. If I turn these borders back on again, just to see what all of my elements are actually doing, you can see that in fact, that has been moved to the middle. So this container here and the Instagram logo, they are sitting in the middle. It's just that all the stuff that's in here, it hasn't been affected by it because it's a layer down. So I just simply haven't played around with the layout of the contents of this div. So this is where having this border comes in quite handy, just to see when things aren't moving around as they should be. It kind of shows you what's going on in the different layers within your structure. So let's just, let's get rid of that just for now and continue with the styling here. And I think actually what I can do with the logo, now that I've got this panel set up, rather than this temporary value that I had for the width, I can set it to a percentage. I can now say width, well, if I set this to 100%, then it will take up the width of my container. There is still some space left and right, but that's just that padding that I set for it. I don't want it to be as big as that. That's way too big. So let's put it down to 65%. And that's a lot better. Essentially, it's now taking, rather than a fixed pixel width, it's taking a percentage of the container that's inside of. And that is the panel, which does have a fixed pixel width. A couple of other little things to do though. It's really close to the top here, and it's also quite close to the form that's underneath. But you can see here on the original page, there's a lot of spacing around it. So that can be done by adding in some margins. I can add a margin top of 20 pixels. That moves it down a bit. And then a margin at the bottom of it of a little bit more, let's say 30 pixels. And that creates this little gap underneath. So now let's start styling this bit here. So this is the input that I've got within my form section. So this form here, it doesn't have a class, but it's the only form that I've got on this page. So I can just access it by going straight into the form element. So I'll say form, and I'll set it to have a width of 100%. So that's going to set my form to take up the entire available space within this container. So it doesn't look like anything has changed here, but again, those borders, remember, they show what's actually going on in the background here. Then again, I want to set a display of flex here. So again, I'm going to be using Flexbox. If I save it, it puts everything side by side. So I don't want that. I want my flex direction to be columns. And now everything is set up on top of each other and it's spanning the entire width of it. So that's what this width did. So it wasn't visible until this point, but if I comment this out, you notice it just goes to essentially the size of the biggest element. But if I set the width back to 100%, it takes up the entire space available within the panel for me. And now the last thing is just to centralize everything. So I do it in the exact same way as I did previously, align items, center. And now this time, you notice that it has taken everything into the middle here. Now I can start working on these inputs. So the inputs here are quite a bit bigger. They've got a little gray background, gray outline, and the text inside them is a little bit smaller probably than what I've got here. So I'm going to style them to make them look a bit more like that. You can put a bit of spacing between them and so on. So to do that, well, remember they also have a class. So I could just target my inputs. However, I'm using inputs for different things. So I've got two inputs that are being used for these text boxes and then an input for login. So I can't target all of the elements called input. I have to go to the classes. So I've got two that have the class of input box. If I target that class, I'll be able to play around with the styling of just those inputs there. Let's say input box. And first of all, you notice they've gone small again. So I set the width to 100% and that stretches them across to the entire width of the element. Now let's add a little bit of padding inside the box itself. So you can see the text is right inside the outline of the box. If I add a padding of say 10 pixels, that's going to push them out quite a lot. So it's created 10 pixels all around this text, all within the inside of the outline. Let's space them out a little bit as well. So margin bottom of 10 pixels, so they're not just pressed up against each other. That pushes them out. Now I need to add a background color here. So background color, it was a little bit gray. So we'll go with F8, which I believe is what I used already for the overall page background. So this background here is exactly the same as the page background. And the next thing is that border. You notice it's just the default solid black line. It's a little bit too heavy. So we'll say border 1 pixel solid, and we'll go for a lighter color here. There you go, that looks much better. And I don't like those sharp corners, so we'll say border radius of 2 pixels. And that just smooths out the outline a little bit. So already you can see they're looking a lot more similar to what's going on here. The next thing is the placeholder text. So the text here is a little bit lighter and it's also quite a bit smaller. So let's go into, now to access the placeholder is a property of this input. So I need to call up my class, which is my input box. And then I need to add 2 columns and say placeholder. So within the placeholder, first of all, I'll change the color. And I'll set this to 8A, 8A, 8A. So that makes it a little bit lighter, hardly noticeable actually. And then a font size, well, let's make it smaller, so 12 pixels. And there you go. So the font has gone a little bit smaller and a little bit lighter. So it's more reflective of what's going on the actual page. And the other thing is what happens when I click on it. It still gives me that really dark, strong border outline. That's not what happens when I click on this. It just gives it a very light highlighting of a slightly darker gray. So I want to be doing the same thing here, and I can do this by, again, accessing the input box class and then going into the focus property. So when I go into focus, this is essentially meaning that when it's selected, so when this is the item that's in focus, what do I want to happen? I want to get rid of that outline. So I say my outline is going to be none. So let's click on it again. You notice nothing happens anymore. So that outline that was there is gone. Well, I do still want to add something. So I'm going to be doing this with the border. Say my border is 1px solid. So pretty much just what I had before. It's just this one here, but I just changed the color. So I changed the color to the same as my placeholder text. This slightly darker gray. And now when I click, you can see it's giving me the exact same highlight that I was getting on the main page. And I think that's pretty much it. That's the placeholders set up exactly as I need them. So now I can move on to this button here. So the button that I've got is again, it stretches across the entire thing and it's a light blue color. So let's style that button next. So for the button, again, this was an input, but it had a specific class of button. So I can access that here by targeting that class. We'll say button. First of all, let's set the width. At the moment, it's too small. It's basically as big as the text allows it to be. If I set it to 100%, it's going to span the entire width of the element, or rather of its parent, sorry. Then a couple of other things. I want to space it out. Again, it's all bunched up very closely together. So here, the spacing between the inputs is quite small, but then the spacing above and below the button is a lot bigger. So let's space that out. Let's say margin. Remember, to space things out between themselves, you can use margin. When you're working with inside the element, you use padding. So we'll set a margin of 7 pixels top and bottom, and then 0 left and right. And there you go, it's moved it out a little bit. Now let's add padding, so that's the stuff on the inside, which essentially is going to make the button bigger because it adds space on the inside of the button that can't be used by the text. So my padding is going to be 7 pixels inside and 0 on left and right. So 7 top and bottom, 0 left and right. Space that a lot better. Actually, I'm going to change the margin. I'll go with 10 pixels. Yeah, that's a lot better now. The color is the default gray, so we need to change that. We'll go background color is B2DFF. See, I don't know if that's the actual color they used. I just kind of play around with hex values until I got one that looks quite similar to what they've got going on there. So that's fine, but now it kind of makes the outline a lot more obvious. It's pretty ugly. So first of all, we'll get rid of that, but first let's just change the color of the text. So the color of the text is white. So that's just triple F. Okay, that's looking a lot better. Let's add a border radius. So all of these have just sharp corners by default. It looks a lot better once you add a border radius onto these kind of inputs and buttons. We'll get rid of that border. So we'll say border is none. And the font size is a little bit small. So let's say 14 pixels. Okay, and that's looking a lot more like the actual page here. So I would say that that's that button now styled as well. Now I need to move on to the divider that I had here. So remember, what I wanted to do is have this OR with a horizontal line on either side of it. All I've got at the moment is just the text OR. I don't have anything else going on. But remember, I did have these classes either side of it. So I had my section, or rather my class for divider, and within it I had the text OR, but either side of it I had a class of line with no content. So this was all done on purpose. I'll be able to now style these individually to give me that effect of having something either side of it. So first of all, let's style that divider. So the divider is essentially the parent for all of this stuff. So it contains what's going to be the two lines, and it contains the OR. What I want to do, although you can't see them right now, in reality I want them to be lined up in a row. So here, if you imagine these as individual divs, you've got this line here, then the OR, and then another line. I want them to be displayed in a row, which I can achieve very easily with Flexbox. So I'm going to apply Flexbox, or display of flex, onto my divider class. So let's go here, say divider, and display flex. Okay, nothing changes because you can't actually see the individual classes around either side of it. But while I work on this section, what I will do is turn this border back on so that we can see a little bit better what's going on. So let's set this, first of all, you can see it's just taken up the size of the OR text, and then there's a little bit either side of it, left and right for those divs. Well, let's make it take up the entire width of that panel. So it takes up 100% of the width of the element. Play around with the font size as well. So I'll say the font size, it's a little bit too small at the bottom. Let's go with 12 pixels. Oh, have I done it the wrong way around? Oh no, it was a little bit too big actually. So maybe 14, I think that's what I had by default. No, 12 is right. Let's go with 12. Let's change the color of that. So color, again, I'm going to go with that darker gray that I've used in a few other places. Let's make it bold. So font weight is bold. So the text becomes thicker. And then this is where the flex stuff comes into it. So I'm going to add a gap of 20 pixels. So with flex and with grid as well, you can add a gap between your elements by just saying gap 20 pixels. So it's kind of like margin. But when I save that, you notice straight away what's happened here. I've got these little gaps within this container, and there's just these vertical red lines next to them. So now you can see better what I've got going on that I have. In fact, I'll zoom in. You can see that I've got a little space here for one of the divs for the lines, and another space here for the other div. They just don't have any content. They don't have any widths or anything like that, so there's nothing going on, but you can at least visualize them. So because I've got this gap between them, they're now spaced out a little bit. The next thing to do then is to add some kind of content to them. So I will leave this divider class as it is, and I will move on to the line class. So remember, the line class is just this class for the divs that are either side of the OR. Now the property that I want to give them is going to be determining how wide they are. So at the moment, they don't really take up any space. You can see that I've got the div here, then there's the gap that I've set with this property here, the OR, another gap, and that's it. There's all this free space to the right-hand side that's not been taken up. So Flexbox, it will do this by default, but it's possible to tell the items what to do in this situation. So when there is all this space here, what's going to happen? Do I want them to take up that space, or do I want them to just leave it as it is? Well, I want the OR to stay exactly as it is. I don't want that to be any bigger or smaller, but I want these two divs, which are my lines, to take up all of the additional space and split it between themselves. And this is done with the flex grow property. So if I set this to 1, you notice now they have taken up all of the available space. So it started off with 100% of the container, or the parent. We had the OR taking up all its space. There's a gap either side, and then whatever space was left was just divided in half, and each of those classes has taken that to themselves. So there's actually a shorthand for this. I can just say flex 1, and it's going to do the exact same thing. There we go. Okay, so that's fine, but there's still no content. To create content, I need to add a height to them. I will say height of 1 pixels, and now they've gone tiny, but now there is actually something there. And to make them visible, to make it into a line, I can just add a background color to it. So if I set the background color to, again, that dark gray, 888888, you can see, in fact, I'll hide this here, I'll hide those borders now, I don't need them. And there you go, you can see that they've appeared. So that's simply all I've done here is I've taken those divs, I've made them stretch across all of the available space, I've given them a height of 1 pixels, and I've given them a background color. So I can make them as big as I want. If I can set my height to 10 pixels, and they become really thick lines. Set them back to 1, and they go back to how they were on this original page. So they're looking fine. The problem is they're not really lined up the way they should be. So they're sitting right at the top of the available space in the container, not in line with this. Well, remember, this is now a flex container. So my divider, which contains these two divs as well as the or, is a flex container, and all of these are flex items. That means that I can align them whichever way I want. So if I just add align items center in here, it's going to centralize them. So it's taken all of these 3 elements and it's vertically aligned them with each other. So now they're all coming up in line. Okay, so that's essentially all of that top section of the panel complete. If I reset that zoom back to how it was, it's looking very similar to what's going on here. I've got all of this stuff set up. What's next is to do these links here, this login with Facebook and forgot password. So those, again, they had their own classes, so I can just target those. I can say FB, which was the login with Facebook one. First of all, let's space it out a little bit. Again, it's all too close to each other because within the very start of the document, I got rid of my margins and padding. So by doing this, it's meant that everything has been just pushed up against each other, but it allows me to adjust the margins as I want them rather than have these default values. So I'll set 20 pixels top and bottom and then 0 left and right. So straight away that spaced them out quite nicely. That font is actually a different color. So we'll set a color, it's kind of like a bluish color, I guess, for Facebook. So we'll set this one up. And it's hard to see the difference because it's still styled as a link, but I'll get rid of that now. I'll say text decoration none. Oh, I've misspelled that. Decoration is none. And now you can see a little bit better that it's more of a blue color than the black and gray that I've got on the website so far. Make it a little bit different size, so I can't remember if it's, do I want to go a little bit bigger or do I want to go a little smaller? No, it's definitely smaller. So I want to go, yeah, 14 sounds about right. And then even smaller for the forgot password link. So I'll come to that in a second. And let's play around with the font weight a little bit. So font weight, 200, that doesn't do anything. 500, doesn't do anything either. Do I want to go 600? Yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, it's maybe a little bit too bold, but that's okay. It looks better that way. Now the link is set up and it's looking good, but you'll notice there's one thing here that I'm still missing, is this little Facebook logo here, this little icon. So I could load that in as an image and just put it in at the start, but instead I'm going to use Font Awesome for this. I need to go into my HTML and into the head of the document and just add that in before I can actually use the fonts. I'll add a little comment here just to start separating things out a little bit. So this is my style sheet. And underneath that, I'm going to have another bit that's going to be the Font Awesome. Let's say Font Awesome. And I just need to copy this across from my other screen. So when I registered with Font Awesome, they give you a link that you need to then put into the head of the document. So in your case, this might be different, but I'll put this in the description anyway, the entire code of it. So you'll be able to just copy and paste this if you like. But in reality, if you register with Font Awesome, you will have your own dedicated script link. So that automatically won't do anything, but I'm now able to access the different logos that are used on the Font Awesome website. Now I'm not going to add this straight into this class here. Instead, I'm going to use before. So we'll say FB and double colon before. So now I can start adding the font and that little logo just before my actual text. Now to do that, I need to call in the font here as a font family. So normally you would use font family to specify the font that you want to use, but you can also use it for Font Awesome. I'll add in here Font Awesome 5 and it's brand. So there's different types, but I'm using brands for this Facebook logo. And I need to specify what the content is going to be, not center. Content is going to be, now all of these logos and all of these icons, they have specific values and specific codes. So the one for Facebook is F082. And if I save that, you'll actually see it popping up straight away. There's a little Facebook logo appeared there. If I change this to something else, so say 83, I'm not sure if that'll give me anything. 84 maybe? It doesn't seem to be working. But 82 is the one for Facebook. Okay, so there we go. I've got it here, but it's stuck right against the text. So I actually want to space that out a little bit. Let's give it some margin. Say margin right of 5 pixels. Okay, so that gives them a little bit of spacing. And it's a little bit small though. So the one on the actual page is quite a bit bigger. So let's just play around with the font size. Because this is just loaded in as a font, I can access the same properties. So I can say font size, let's say 14 pixels. I think that's probably how big it is now. 16, yep, it's a little bigger. 18, there we go. So that looks a little bit better. That's about the same size as they've got on here. It's not the exact same icon, but it's close enough and it looks pretty good. So this initial panel up here is actually nearly finished. The only thing left to style is the forgot password section. Now for that as well, I already have a class defined, so I can just say forgot. If I go back to the HTML as a little reminder, down here I've got my 2 links. So this was my FB and my class forgot, which is forgot password. So I can target that with this class of forgot here. Now the first thing I want to do is get rid of that text decoration. I'll set it to none. Okay, so I guess rid of the underline. Actually, that's the second thing I want to do. First thing is I want to set the color. And this is going to just be black. So we'll say 000. There we go, changes this to black. And this should be quite a bit smaller actually. So font size, let's go with 12 pixels. Yeah, that's better. So on the actual website, that font is quite a bit smaller than the rest of the fonts. Okay, and that's it. So that's that panel pretty much finished. Now I can move on to the other two. Now you might be wondering why I've left everything in the top left like this rather than centering it. It's a good point. I'm going to finish all of this setup first of all, and then when I get to the footer, that's when I'll start playing around and getting everything contained, like this whole wrapper set up in the middle of the page as it should be. For now, it's just easier to work with it as it is here and just build up the panels one by one. So this bottom panel here, you notice it's kind of already styled in the exact same way as the top panel, and that's because they have a common class of panel. So the panel itself is styled, it's just the content within it that I need to work on. So this actually won't take too long. I just need to access a couple of these additional classes that are within it. So first of all, it's this panel here. If I go back to my HTML, I've got a class of panel and I've got a class of sign up. So panel has already been applied to it. That's why it looks exactly the same as the one above it. But sign up is specific to this. I haven't worked with that just yet. So it means that I can add some additional styling that's specific to this. So let's go into sign up and let's do a couple of things here. So first of all, remember this is a flex container now. So these are flex items within it. So they're stuck right side by side against each other, and I want to add a little gap between them. Well, I've done this already before by just setting a gap. Let's say a gap of 5 pixels. That spaces them out a little bit. Let's go font size. What should we set it to? So it's actually quite a bit smaller than that. So 14, oh, not 44, 14 pixels. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so that looks very similar. I'm going to get to the link in a second, but this is looking almost correct. It's just not sitting in the center. You noticed when I changed the font size, everything kind of moved to the left. So let's fix that. Let's justify content center. And there we go. Now that's sitting perfectly in the middle. The text is all set up correctly. I just need to change this link here. Now this link is part of the sign up class. So I can target it by saying, go into the sign up class and then look at the link that's in there. So I don't want to apply it to all of the links because that's going to affect the links up here as well. I only want to target this one here. I didn't give it a specific class because it's the only link within the sign up panel. So first of all, let's get rid of the text decoration. Set that to none. Actually, I've done that again. That's the second thing I want to do. The first thing I want to do is change the color. So for the color, let's go with 3BB1FF. I don't remember where I got this from. I just played around with different hex values until I got images that kind of looked close enough. And that does. The only thing is it's quite light. You notice here they're bold. So let's set that to a thicker font weight. Font weight 600. There we go. Okay, so that's it. That was pretty easy. That's the bottom panel, or sorry, this middle panel styled as well now. The only thing left in this wrapper section is to do this very last apps section. Well, one thing is that the images are different sizes and that one is way too big. I'll get to that in a second, but first of all, how do I lay this out? They kind of have this get the app on top and then they've got these side by side. So I'm going to use Flexbox here again. So the way I'm going to use this is I'll have this as a flex container, and then this is going to be one flex item, and then these two together are going to be another flex item. I've already set up my HTML that way. So I've got this div class for apps, and then within it, I've got get the app, but then I have another div which contains the App Store images. So if I set this to a flex container, then this and this will become my flex items, and I can just stack them on top of each other. So let's do that. Let's say apps and display flex. Now by default, remember that sets it to display in direction of row. So that puts them side by side. That's not what I want. Let's change flex direction to column. That's going to put them on top of each other. And there we go. The image is resized again back to how they were before, but now they're stacked up on top of each other. Now let's play around with the positioning. So let's align items center, not center, center. There we go. Everything's gone to the middle now. Play around with that font size. So do I want it bigger or smaller? Not sure actually, maybe a little bit smaller. So 14, yeah, that looks better. Okay, we'll set that to 14 pixels. And let's just space things out a little bit. So at the moment, again, it's all kind of bunched up. Let's go 20 pixels top and bottom and 0 left and right. And there we go. So that's pushed away from the top. It's not pushed away from underneath it here yet, but we'll get to that in a second. So essentially what's happened now is, in fact, if I go back and turn this border on at the top and save it, you can see I've got this container here, and this has given me, this is my flex container, and that's put everything on top of each other. But notice that these two images, they've also got this little box on the outside of them. So that's another div that I can further style. And I want these to be side by side with each other. So I could do it in a couple of different ways, but I really like Flexbox. So I'm going to use Flexbox again for them. So let's get rid of this border and we'll go down to, well, how was this accessed? So this was set up within a div with a class of app stores. If I just target app stores, then I can set my display to flex on them, and that's going to automatically put them in as rows. And there we go. They're now sitting side by side with each other. Let's set a gap between them of 10 pixels. Okay, that's a bit better. And space them out from the top. So margin top of 20 pixels. Okay, good. So that's working fine, except they're not really lined up the right way. So if we go back up, bring in this border and see what's going on. So you can see that they're sitting in the right place, but as in the container is sitting in the right place, but the images are floating outside of it. So I need to make sure that I actually give them some kind of sizes, and that's going to fix that issue for me. So that means that I need to access or target the individual images. So the app stores was the div that's around them. The individual images are within that class. They don't have their own classes, but that's okay. I can just target them by going into app stores and then img, and that's going to address those two images there. So let's give them a width. We'll go width of 140 pixels and a height. Well, I don't think I need to actually set a height, but I'll set a height to auto just so it automatically adjusts. So it didn't really make any difference there, but I think it's just good practice to have that. So now you can see there, because I've given them a fixed size, the container has been able to resize itself and everything is sitting nicely in the middle. So now it's looking pretty much exactly the same as the real website. Okay, so now that is the entire wrapper. So this section is now fully styled. So before I move on to the footer, I just want to get this positioning correct. I want to set it right in the middle of the screen. So it's vertically aligned and it's horizontally aligned. So to do that, we go back up to this wrapper class up here. And for now, remember, all I had was display flex. I didn't add anything else really into it. And display flex meant that I ended up with my left and right in a row next to each other. So I can now start adding a little bit of alignment overall to this. So first of all, let's say align items center. So let's see what this does. Okay, so that puts these two panels side by side with each other. So if I comment this out just to see what's going on, you notice this previously was just at the top of its element, or of its parent, sorry. Close it, add that in, and now it's all centrally aligned on the horizontal. And now let's do justify content center, and that moves the entire wrapper or everything that's within it over into the middle of the page. Okay, so that's fine. I've now got that sitting up there. But how do I push it down the way? How do I make all of this entire wrapper move down? I could just add a bunch of padding. Like I could say, or rather I could put margin, either or. So I could say margin top of 200 pixels, and that's fine. I guess that kind of works. But then if I zoom out, that doesn't actually work. So you can see that it's not really in the middle. I only made it position in the middle based on my screen size. So on someone else's screen, it's not going to look right. On a smaller or bigger screen, it's going to move up or down. It's just going to maintain this at the top. So I could try different settings here rather than a fixed value of 200 pixels. But instead, I'm going to stick with Flexbox, and I'm going to use one of the properties that I've already used before, which is Flex Grow. So at the moment, if I save this again, it's just bunching everything up at the top. So if I turn these borders back on again, you can see I've got this wrapper. So this is my main content. You can't really make out the lines too well anymore, but essentially that's where it ends. And then underneath I've got my footer, and then there's all this free space. So you can see the red outline here, that's the body. So the entire body takes up the whole of the screen, but all of this is just free space. There's nothing here. What I want to actually happen is, regardless of how big the screen is, I want all of that free space to be used up. I don't want the footer to really get any bigger. Once I add the content to it, to have all these links, it's kind of going to be as big as this. I don't really want that to get any bigger than it is. But this wrapper section, I want that to take up essentially the entirety of the rest of the page. So I can just use Flex Grow again. I can go into my wrapper, and I can say Flex Grow of 1. And remember what that does is it takes all the free space that there was before, and then it looks at the individual items within it. So the items that I've got within the body are my wrapper and my footer. So by saying Flex Grow is 1 on the wrapper and nothing on the footer, it's essentially saying that this wrapper takes priority, it takes precedence. So everything that's here, all this available space, no matter how big the page is, it's all going to go to the wrapper. Uncomment that, and there we go. So now I can zoom out as much as I want. All the free space is always going to the wrapper, and it's always taking up all of it. So that's an easy way for me to align this and make sure that all of this is sitting central. Let's just get rid of these borders again. And there we go. It's almost complete actually. I just need to do the footer, and then that'll be the page done. So the footer, if I go back to it, it's just a bunch of links. So it's a whole heap of these individual links laid out here. And to do that, I can just create a long list. So if you've done a nav bar before, for example, you will know that you just create, or one option anyway, is to create an unordered list and then put all of these as list items within it. And then you can play around with the styling to lay them out in the way you want. So that's how I'm going to approach this as well. I'll go back into my HTML file, and I already have my sort of placeholder for the footer. So I've got the footer here, and instead of saying footer content, which was just temporary, I can put in an unordered list with the tag UL. So let's close that one out straight away. And then I'll just start putting individual list items here. So list item, and they're going to be links. So a href, they're not going anywhere. So just dummy links here. And the first one, so the order of them here was about, blog, jobs, help, and so on. So the first one was about. Then we close the A tag, close the LI tag. And if I save that, you can see a little link come here that says about. So I can do the same thing, copy that down and change that to, what was after it? Blog. So next one was blog. Now I'm not going to manually type these out. I just want to demonstrate the first couple. So I'm just going to copy them across. I've already typed them out as a little snippet before the video. So I'll copy all of these in here and just make sure my indentation is correct. That is way too much. Save that, and there we go. So I've got all of the links coming in here. Now, of course, they're all just stacked up on top of each other. That's default for the list. That's what it's supposed to look like. I've just got an unordered list of all of these individual links. So that's fine. That's one of them done. And you can see there's a little space between them. There's another little subsection here. A couple of different ways to do this. I've gone maybe a little bit lazy, and I've just used another unordered list for it. So let's create another one here, unordered list. And then there's only a couple of list items here. So the first list item is just a language. So it says English, close that one out. The next list item is the copyright. So it's copyright 2021, and there's a little copyright symbol here. So we can add that in by adding and sign, copy, and semicolon. So that's automatically going to add that in, and then it's 2021 Instagram from Facebook. Close that tag and close the UL, and there we go, they're appearing down the bottom. So that's it. That is all the HTML markup done. I can now just start styling all this to make it look a little better and make it look like this. So we go back into the CSS, and right down the bottom I just need to target a couple of those additional ULs that I've added in. And notice I didn't actually put any classes against them. I don't have any other ULs within here that I need to play. If I had a navbar, for example, that I wanted to perform slightly differently, then I would have to add classes or have some way of differentiating between them. But here I only have one or two ULs, but they're going to be doing the exact same thing and they're going to look exactly the same. So I didn't bother with classes there. So first of all, I will target the footer. So we'll say footer, and I'll give it a max width. So you notice that on the actual page, it doesn't take up the entirety. So it doesn't go from left all the way to the right. There is a sort of fixed max width here. So we'll say max width, and I will set mine to 35M. Okay, now you won't actually notice any real difference, but if I go back up and add these borders, you notice now I've got this max width set here. Now this isn't in the middle, and I think it's because I've actually missed something when I was doing this. My body I've displayed as flex, and I've given it a flex direction of column. So I've been able to center everything within the wrapper, but I haven't done this for the footer. So what I actually need to be doing is going to the body, which is my flex container for both the wrapper and the footer, and making sure that I align or justify all the items within it to the center. So that's going to bring this into the middle. So apologies, I've mixed that actually. So go back up to the body tag here and say, now is it going to be, let's try align items center. Yeah, okay, that's what I needed. So I missed that off, but if you add that in, you can see now everything's sitting slap in the middle here, as it should be. Let's get rid of these borders again, and now we can start styling this to have them laid out in a row rather than in a column. And I think you already know what I'm going to be using to do that. It isn't actually going to be the footer class or the footer tag that I need to style here. The footer just contains the two unordered lists. So it's the ULs that I need to style to get them to be laid out in a row. So if I target my ULs, well, they're both going to have the same layout, so I don't need to differentiate between the two of them. Now, of course, the thing I'm going to be doing here, as you've probably already guessed, is change the display to flex. That changes my ULs to a flex container, and all of the individual list items become flex items. So it looks pretty terrible right now, but that's just because they're all kind of wrapping over to this. Well, sorry, they're not wrapping. They're just continuing it off the side of my container space, and they're just not styled at all yet. But they are now going from a column display to a row display. So we're kind of getting there. Now they're not wrapping, so they're just going as far as they go, essentially. What I want them to do is take up the available space and then pop on to the next line. Now to do that with Flexbox is quite straightforward. We just say flex wrap, and then we set this to wrap. So the default would be no wrap. I think, is it spelled with a hyphen or not? No, it's just one word, is no wrap. But if I get rid of that, just put it to wrap, you can see that as soon as it runs out of space, remember this is set to a fixed width. Once it runs out of that space, it moves on to the next line. So that's better. That's kind of what I need to do. But I need to line them all up in the middle. So they're all kind of starting from the left-hand side at the moment. So let's say justify content center. That's better. So everything's centered now. Let's change the font size. It's a little bit too big at the moment. So 12 pixels, is that a little too small? No, that's about right. So they have quite small font for that bottom section there. So we set that. Then let's get rid of those bullets at the start of each one. So I say list style is none. So all the bullets are now gone. And I need to space them out, which could be done with margin. But again, because this is a Flexbox, I'm going to add in a gap. So a gap of 10 pixels. And now not only are they spaced out left and right, they're also spaced out top and bottom. And now let's put finally a margin of 20 pixels top and bottom and 0 left and right. So that adds a margin to my entire UL. So the whole unordered list gets a margin of 20 pixels. So that's kind of created space between them, but it's also created space underneath and bumped it off the bottom of the page. If I got rid of that, you can see it didn't look very good. It essentially just almost squished right against the bottom. So that lays it out a bit better. And that is the ULs complete. So I still need to get rid of these underlines, and I need to change the font color so they don't look like links. But that's not done through the UL. That's going to be done through the list items and the actual links themselves. So let's target the list items and let's target the links. And the reason I've combined the two here is because all of these are links, but all of these are list items. I want them to have the same styling. So rather than typing out the styling for the list and then for A separately, I'll just combine them both together. Now the first thing is to get rid of that underline. So text decoration is none. And I've done that again. That's the second thing I want to do. First thing I want to do is change the color. So the color is 8A, which I've used in a few other places. So we go for that gray color here. Okay, that's looking a lot better already. That's kind of matching up to what they've got on the page there. But it is still all a little bit too low. So here they've got a little bit more space underneath. And I think I can achieve that just with adding margin. So this section is the footer. So in my case, I've got the footer here. I can just add a margin to it. So let's say margin bottom of 40 pixels. And there we go. That's pushed it up. So that's looking a lot better. I mean, it's not 100% identical to the actual Instagram page, but you can see when I flick between them, it is very, very close. It's very similar. So I've managed to recreate most of the styling and most of the layout just using Flexbox for pretty much all of it. Now the only final thing to do here is to add this responsiveness. So on the real page, as I shrink it, those phones disappear. So they go invisible and you're just left with the panels. In my case, that's not going to happen. So as I make it smaller, well, it kind of just messes up a little bit. Both of them just go off the screen and I end up with this scroll bar down the bottom. So that's not very good. It's a little bit ugly. The fix for that is actually quite straightforward. So we're going to add a media query. So let's do that at the bottom of the CSS here. Say at media. And the media query, in this case anyway, is just determined by the width that I want things to happen at. So I'm going to say max width of 860 pixels. So when we drop below this value, when the screen shrinks to a width of less than 860 pixels, I want the following things to change. So that's what I'm going to have within here. Well, what is it that I want to change? When this gets smaller, all that's going to happen is the phones are going to disappear. And remember, those phones, they're contained within their own div. So if I go back to the HTML, I've got this div class here called left, and that's what contains the phones and the screen image. It doesn't have anything else in it. So then it kind of goes to say that if I simply hide that entire div, well, that gives me that responsiveness that I need. So go back into here, I target that left class, and I just say display none. So I've been using display quite a lot throughout for setting things to flex, but you can also set it to none, which just means it's not displayed at all. So if I save that, nothing happens instantly, but as I shrink this page, it disappears. And then the layout ends up being exactly the same as what we've got on the Instagram page. So that's it. That's how you create an Instagram page, or essentially any clone, using HTML and CSS. So I hope that was useful, and I hope that it showed the power of Flexbox and how much easier it makes the organization and the layout on a page. So if you found that useful, then please do leave a like and feel free to subscribe. Thanks for watching.